music has always been a very important part of my life. From the time I was a little baby, my mother, Ruth H. Barrus, was probably the most influential musician in the Upper Snake River Valley during her lifetime. She began a class of piano students and organ students that have gone throughout the church. In fact, Alexander Schreiner, the former former tabernacle organist in Salt Lake City, paid tribute to her at a National Guild of Organists, saying that she has taught more church organ students than any other organist in the church. Remarkable person, and of course, coming from with a mother like that, I started very early. I started piano when I was about 3 or 4 years old, but I was introduced to the violin at the age of 5, and I never looked back on the piano. I became a violinist, and that was my life. But anyway, I still remember my first introduction to music as we hear it on the radios and in recordings all the time. I was a little guy, and my folks bought an old phonograph turntable, the kind that you crank in order to get it to go. And they bought 2 sets of recordings for me. One was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the other was Beethoven's Kreutzer Violin Sonata. The Ninth Symphony was recorded on the old style 78 discs that were about 1/4 of an inch thick and only on one side. And so that symphony, such a long symphony, had discs that were almost as high as I was and weighed at least 4 times what I weighed when I started listening to them. But anyway, that was my first introduction to classical music as such. And I listened to those recordings over and over and over again, and my life has become music. And my father, who's a farmer in Sugar City, helped that out tremendously when he said I can either practice my violin at 5 o'clock in the morning, or I can go with him and milk the cows at 5 o'clock in the morning. And so I became a violinist. But anyway, I studied the violin. I was blessed to have some very good teachers. I started out with my uncle, who was a fine violinist. And then, right after the Second World War ended, a French violinist, a refugee from France, Fernand Pascal was his name, came to eastern Idaho, and I started studying with him and was introduced to wonderful violin technique from an outstanding French violinist. Later on, Dr. Alma Dittmer taught at Ricks College, and I studied a few years with him. When I graduated, the year I graduated from Ricks College, I became the first student audition winner for the Idaho Falls Symphony Orchestra, and I played the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with the Idaho Falls Symphony Orchestra my senior year. That same year, when I graduated from high school, my mother went to General Conference in April of that year and heard the premiere performance of a magnificent work called The Oratorio from the Book of Mormon by Dr. Leroy Robertson, performed by the Utah Symphony Orchestra and the choirs. And she was so impressed with that magnificent work that she called Dr. Robertson and asked if I might have a chance to audition for him, since I was looking at college. And so I made an appointment, and I went down to she took me down to Salt Lake City. I auditioned for Dr. Robertson, who was chairman of the Department of Music at the University of Utah. And he heard me play, and he called Maurice Abravanel on the phone, who was the conductor of the Utah Symphony at that time. Said, "I have a young man you need to hear." I went over and played for maestro, and he signed me up immediately as a member of the Utah Symphony Orchestra. I was the youngest member of the Utah Symphony Orchestra, and of course it changed my life. I became majored in music at the University of Utah, studied with Dr. Robertson for a year on the violin, and then went to the concertmaster of the Utah Symphony Orchestra, Harold Wolf, and studied with him. I wanted to go on a mission, but I was engaged to a very good-looking high school sweetheart, Carol, and that the Korean War was still limiting missionaries who could go out, and I couldn't go. We were engaged, wondering when on earth I'd be able to go on a mission, or whether I'd ever be able to go on a mission. But we both were adamant in saying we should go on a mission. That was primary. One of the main reasons I felt I had to go on a mission, my father served a missionary when he was 20 years of age. And then during the Korean War, they couldn't call out young missionaries because of the war, and so they called some family fathers to go out on missions, and my father was one of those that went. And the time he was called up to go, my mother was very ill. They'd lost 2 little babies, one just recently, and I was 16 years old at the time, and he had to leave the family and the farm to go out into the mission field. They called him up for short-term missions about 8 months. But during that 8 months, he turned the running of the farm over to his 16-year-old son, and I became the man of the family during those months that he was in the mission field. But anyway, not anyone that had the faith to leave a sick wife and a family and go out into the mission field, I had to follow in his footsteps. So that was another reason that we had to wait until finally, when I was a senior in college, they released the restrictions, and I was able to go. And I went to the Swiss-Austrian mission. Served for 2.5 years there because they didn't have NTCs back then, so they increased the length of time so you could learn the language. At the end of the mission, I was in, Vienna, Austria is the capital of music in the world, and I thought, gee, why not stay another year and study music in Vienna? I wrote my sweetheart that I thought it might be a good idea, and she'd been waiting for me for 5.5 years. She didn't like that idea. Her answer in the letter came back still steaming.
No.
But anyway, because of that seed that was planted, her mother went to work and made enough money to buy a boat ticket and a train ticket. We didn't fly at that time. It was train and boat in those years. She bought a plane and boat ticket for her to get over to Austria, and we were married in the Swiss Temple 2 hours after I was released as a missionary, and spent a year honeymoon in Vienna, Austria, studying music. She studied piano, and I studied at the Academy of Music at Vienna in Austria. And
Frau Professor Greta Hinterhofer,
was her.
and his was A.D. Steinbauer.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, wonderful, wonderful experience to grow musically, and we came home then, and I finished up at the University of Utah. Was then hired to come up to Ricks College to start a symphony orchestra program there, and so I began the symphony orchestra. And then after 3 years teaching here, I wanted to get my doctorate, so we went back to the University of Utah, and I was rehired to play with the Utah Symphony during that time, so I could make my way through the university studies. And Carol began playing piano for the Ballet West, for the rehearsals for Ballet West. during
One
that
of the
time.
neatest experiences I ever had, because I'd play, and then I'd watch and do all this. Really a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. But anyway, after completing my classwork there, and getting my master's and classwork for the doctor's degree, we came back here to Ricks College. I became chairman of the music department here and was involved in planning the Snow Center for the Performing Arts, and was able to complete that planning while I was in the music department, while I was department chairman there. And then I also feel I'm somewhat responsible for the string program in the Madison School District. At that time, they had no orchestra or string program in the school district, so I began a movement of trying to persuade the school district to get that going. I was serving as a commissioner on the Idaho Commissioner of the Arts at that time, and so I was able to get the Arts Commission to fund the half of the salary for a string teacher to come in and teach. Got the permission of the school board to do that, and they funded that for 5 years. I was also able to negotiate the donation of a body of string instruments to the school district so that they could get started. And
didn't you, Rick, have a string quartet if you played one part?
no, the first year I came to Ricks College, yes, they had no string program here.
That's all they had.
So the first year I was here, we had one cellist, a violist, and one violinist, and I made the string quartet when I when I played. But anyway, I was able to get a string program going here. We had several teachers that came and went, and finally Rick Hansen came in as a teacher, and he built up a remarkable string program here in the Madison School District out of that. But anyway, those were I studied, I taught here for 40 years. The last 17 years, they were thinking of trying to get a public radio station in the state of Idaho, and Idaho had no public radio station, and so President Bruce Hafen, who was the president of the college at that time, was playing with our faculty string quartet. He's an outstanding pianist, and so we played a couple of concerts with him, and in the rehearsals with him, he started quizzing me about public radio, and I had no idea about public radio, but I gave him my ideas of what a public radio station I thought should be, and pretty soon they asked me to help create the radio station here. At that time it was called KRIC. It's now become KBYI. Anyway, I helped create that station and was served as program director for a number of years, and eventually became manager of the public radio station until the time I retired. So that's sort of a dual role of music and radio. And then after I retired, they wanted to create a community symphony orchestra here, and so they asked me to conduct that, the the Rexburg Tabernacle Orchestra, and I conducted that for 22 concerts until just this last fall, and then I finally got to the point where age catches up with you and you have to slow down. And of course my wife cannot care for herself, hasn't been able to for the last 10 years, and so that has been my major responsibility, to take care of her.
And he's my angel boy.
Make sure that
so wonderful.
Make sure she gets fed and cared for, and so it's been a wonderful experience to be able to devote my life to put my priorities in order, care for her for the last 10 years.